right, welcome to Mystery Wire with George Knapp. I'm Ron Futrell. We've also got John Forrest and Carlos Sampson here helping us out. George, welcome. The gift that keeps on giving, we're going to talk about the mob stories here in Las Vegas, certainly. And there are a lot of mysteries still, even though it's been 40 years since the death of Tony Spilotro and his brother Michael. And we've got a lot of stuff we could talk about with this, and we're going to jump into all of it. I met him one time, Las Vegas Country Club, just briefly. I was just new here in Las Vegas, didn't really know who he was. I knew mobsters and I knew he was a guy not to cross. I got that. I didn't realize how short he was in person. You had some interactions with him, though, at times.
Many times.
Certainly much more than what I had just briefly at a golf course.
Many times. I mean, there were perp walks he would be walked out of the courthouse or into a courthouse like that, including the federal courthouse, where I would encounter him, and we'd have a cameraman chasing him around. And then I would see him in bars and restaurants. There were certain places that the mob guys used to go. It was also the places that I used to go, hang out with Ned. I think Ned would purposely seek out people like Spilotro and his associates.
Ned Day, you're talking about here,
Ned Day, who was our managing editor here and a premier muckraker and columnist for the Review Journal. He became an anchorman here at Channel 8, and he was a ferocious chronicler of mob activity and would write the most insulting kinds of remarks about Tony Spilotro and some of his associates, and was a fearless guy whose car was eventually firebombed, but we'll get into that, what the reason was.
No, one of these days we got to do a whole episode on Ned.
Sure.
Certainly, having known him, and you as a great friend of yours, certainly. But Tony Spilotro, it's been 40 years since he and his brother's bodies were found in a cornfield in Indiana. I remember the angst of that 9 days from when he went to Chicago, was missing, and then here in Las Vegas, it was a lot of confusion. Before we jump into that, George, I want to show you a story from 2016 that you aired on what would have been the 30th year, the anniversary, if you will, of the death of Tony Spilotro and his brother Michael.
We're worried about.
You guys got to cut it out. I'm warning you now. All right?
A few words from Tony Spilotro were usually enough to stop people in their tracks. He was the undisputed king of street rackets in Las Vegas in the 70s and 80s. Spilotro earned his ferocious reputation as an enforcer on the mean streets of Chicago and was sent by outfit bosses to Las Vegas, an ambassador of sorts, where his primary job was to quietly protect the skim, millions of dollars being stolen from mob-controlled casinos. But Spilotro and his crew didn't keep a low profile for long.
As in the case of Tony Spilotro, the hole-in-the-wall gang, the robberies and the burglaries, the loan sharking and so on that came with it, and they had free rein to do whatever they wanted to do as long as it didn't create too much notoriety.
Attorney Jeff Silver, back then part of the Gaming Control Board, was targeted for murder after helping to lead the investigation of the skimming operation. When Spilotro's burglary crew, the notorious Hole-in-the-Wall gang, was busted during a heist, the writing was on the wall. Prosecutors convinced one member, Frank Collada, to become a government witness, admitting to murders and other crimes.
And I shot him again.
In June 1986, Spilotro was lured back to Chicago, supposedly with the promise that he would be promoted and that his brother Michael would become a made man. The two men were suspicious but drove away to a meeting. They never returned. In the movie Casino, the Spilotro brothers were beaten with baseball bats in a cornfield, then buried while still alive. The real story is different. It all came spilling out in 2007 when 14 mob figures went on trial in Chicago, accused of 18 murders, including the Spilotros. The FBI's Operation Family Secrets relied on testimony from key mob figures. One defendant, Joey the Clown Lombardo, had been Spilotro's boss. Admitted hitman Frank Collada emerged from the Witness Protection Program in 2007 and gave his first interview to the I-Team. We asked his opinion about who okayed the Spilotro murders.
Joe Lombardo.
Well, he was Tony's boss and he was my boss.
Meaning you guys reported directly to him?
Oh, Tony did. I reported to Tony. So Joe relayed the messages to Tony. And do I think that Joe Lombardo was involved in it? I think that they would have to go to him for an okay on it, yes.
Lombardo and 4 other mobsters were convicted in the trial. According to witnesses who participated in the slayings, the Spilotros met their end in the basement of a home in the suburb of Bensonville. They were beaten and strangled, then the bodies driven to Indiana for burial. 9 days later, a farmer found the grave. DNA from the crime scene helped build the case 21 years later. Spilotro's longtime lawyer, Oscar Goodman, who went on to become mayor of Las Vegas, successfully defended Tough Tony in multiple cases and remembers a different guy than the feared killer.
Well, we spent so much time together, George. I couldn't help but having that kind of relationship. I must have represented Tony on 4 or 5 murder cases. I represented him on racketeering cases, on black book cases. Only the good in Tony Spilotro. You know, I heard the FBI screaming and yelling that he killed 26 different people. And the only thing I could say to that is shame on them. If he killed 26 people, they should have put him in jail for a day. They didn't even do that.
Okay, and to update this story, you talked to Frank Calabrese Jr. His father was a hitman for the mob back then and was and knew what was happening there. Fascinating interview. We're going to have bits and pieces of it during this show. Tell me a little bit about Frank Calabrese before we hear from him and how he related to Tony Spilotro.
Frank Calabrese Jr. Grew up with the mob, the Chicago mob. He was not a made member, but his dad and his uncle were. Frank Calabrese Sr. and Nick Calabrese were made members, were killers, would do whatever the outfit needed them to do. Frank Calabrese Jr. Grew up in that and was on the periphery of mob-type activity, but he ended up becoming a witness against his father. And in fact, his uncle, Nick Calabrese, also flipped and became a witness against the father, Frank Calabrese Sr. Sr. Was at one point a rival of Tony Spilotro for the job in Las Vegas. They had come up in the Chicago outfit at the same time, and they were both being considered who's going to get the plum job of becoming mob ambassador in Las Vegas and watch the skim. Tony got it, Frank didn't.
And you've got some stories relative to the book and also the newspaper headline.
Yeah,
from
well, this
day.
is a headline from I Save Everything. This is a headline from May of 2007 when the Family Secrets trial was just about to get underway. And it became a really big deal when Nick Calabrese entered a plea and became a witness for the government because he and his brother Frank had been a hitman team and had killed people on the orders of the mob, and now he was prepared to testify. I also have, this is Frank Calabrese Jr.'s book, Operation Family Secrets, which tells the story of not only the mob activity that he grew up with, but also the operation where he agreed to wear a wire and testify against his own father, why he did it. And we'll tell where people can see him in a little bit.
Okay. Now, your interview with him, like I said, fascinating. And he talks about, I should probably give a warning before this part of the interview, where he talks about how the mob actually carried out some of the hits they did.
But my dad more so wanted me as a secret weapon. He didn't want everybody to know that I was working with him because I had businesses. I worked, so this was my other life. I lived 2 lives. My friends didn't have any ideas. Most people thought I ran a few errands for my dad and my uncle. Most people thought my dad and my uncle just did loan sharking and bookmaking, and that was it. They had no idea, they were part of this hit team. That when the Chicago mob bosses wanted somebody dead, back then, there were 1 or 2 hit teams. My dad and my uncle were one of the 2 hit teams, and they were good at killing. My dad's signature trait of killing you was with a rope and a knife. He'd strangle you, then he'd cut your throat from ear to ear.
Oh, okay, pleasant. Okay, let's see that newspaper article a little bit more so people can put it in front there. There you go.
There you go.
So they can see the headline on there, the guilty plea with Spilotro.
That guilty plea sort of sealed the fate of the defendants, including Joey the Clown Lombardo, who, probably did not order the Spilotro hit, but he had to sign off on it. I think he was in prison at the time that had happened. But
Tony had just gotten out of control here in Las Vegas. it seemed, and was running his own show. And the Chicago mob had to get him back in line, and he wasn't the type that was going to fall back in line.
Yeah, he'd been sent here for the primary purpose of protecting the skim. The skim out of the casinos is millions of dollars per year that went back to Midwestern mob bosses, not only in Chicago, but Milwaukee, Kansas City, and kind of screwed it up. He got into a relationship with Lefty Rosenthal's wife, which was a forbidden kind of a thing. Rosenthal was the inside man who oversaw a lot of the skimming, and Tony was here to protect him and the flow of the money. And then he started doing all kinds of other stuff, had his own burglary group, Hole in the Wall Gang. He enacted street taxes on loan sharks and drug dealers, and committed murders or ordered murders that were done on his behalf that were not approved by Chicago bosses. He went back to Chicago. He had to. They ordered him to come back with his brother under false pretenses. They thought they were going to Tony was going to be made a capo and Michael was going to become a made man, and that's not what happened.
No, it is not, certainly. And Frank Calabrese has more to say on that when we return to Mystery Wire. Okay, so during that time in 1986 here in Las Vegas, let's try to go back 40 years, George, if between the two of us, if we can. And you were certainly much closer to this story. I remembered it just from being a sports guy here in town. But what was it like? You sitting down with Ned Day, investigative reporter, trying to figure out Tony Spilotro ain't in town. He's gone. He got called back to Chicago, and there were a lot of questions about what happened to him, and nobody knew for a while.
I remember, the big question mark, what happened to him, and the information coming from Chicago. We had some colleagues up there who do interviews with lawyers who were representing the outfit and Spilotro, who had said, he'll show up. The feeling here was in this building that he was gone, that he was dead, that he'd been called back there and he had been rubbed out. Didn't know about his brother at the same time, but that was pretty much the thinking here among not only the reporters who covered it, but FBI sources who were following it as well. They thought that he had come to a bad end. And, it represents a power vacuum because Tony Spilotro represented the zenith of mob power in Las Vegas. He got out of hand for sure, and when the pressure started going on him, that was sort of the beginning of the end for the mob here. So after Spilotro is gone, there were a couple of attempts by other mobs, other families to come in and take over that never took hold. And it was never quite the same.
Frank Calabrese Jr., in your interview with him, talked about what it was like initially when they got called back to Chicago in 1986.
Tony was a very important person as my dad, but they didn't have titles at one point. Tony was going to get a title of a captain, a boss, okay, and his brother was going to be made at the same ceremony. Well, here's the kicker. So if you get whistled in, called for, and you don't go, it's an automatic death sentence, okay? So he has to go. If he doesn't go, he's dead, but so he's going. Now, he's unsure, he's smart. So what does he do? He puts a compact 22 on his brother Michael when they're going. You're not supposed to bring a gun anywhere where you're going with bosses or any meetings. But Tony knows he can talk his way out of it. Oh, my brother didn't know. We didn't, once they get made, they're not going to search if they're getting made, right? So that's what they did. And they took all their jewelry off. They put everything. If I'm not back by a certain time tonight, something went wrong.
And they did not come back, certainly. And something was wrong. And he talks about the killing coming up here in a little bit. Let's jump into that right now. Where he talks about the actual death and what happened at the time of the killing of Michael and his brother Tony.
They're bringing him down in the basement. Michael was first. And they thought they were being made. So when my uncle went up to Michael to shake his hand, my uncle went down and grabbed his legs around the knees, and then Louis Eberle, another master, put a rope around his neck. My uncle says Michael didn't fight; he died right away. But he heard Tony over there fighting with the guys. You're gonna get in trouble. You're not supposed to do this. And when he knew he couldn't, he has to say an act of contrition. And I says, Uncle, did they let him say it? He goes, I didn't hear anything else. That's So they didn't want the bodies to be found, kind of like Jimmy Hoffa. So they lined him up on the floor of the basement, and my uncle had cleaned up some of the blood spots and everything. And that 22 my uncle had got out, he was giving it to Johnny DeFranzo, tried to get the bullets out. And so they took everybody. And late that night, they took the whole team out. Late that night, they brought in a separate hit team just to bury him. But those guys botched the burial, and that's why the bodies were found less than 2 weeks later in a cornfield in Indiana.
Okay, so in light of that, I got a couple of questions here. One of them is, who actually carried out the killing? Then it was called on by Joey the Clown Lombardo.
Well, it was approved by Lombardo.
Approved by him. Okay.
It was a different boss that approved it. I think what I had read was Joey Ayupa, Dubs Ayupa, who was in prison and was mad that he was in prison, felt that part of it was because of Tony's mistakes, and he's the one I think who authorized it. He was he was the boss of the Chicago outfit. It's interesting that they have different teams that bury the bodies. It's not like the movie. They were killed in the basement. We showed a picture of the basement Matt Adams and I found it when we went back there one time. And then another team, Al Tucco, was in charge of the burial. The burial team screwed up. They made it so that it was found within a matter of days, and I think they paid a high price for it as well.
Okay, so there's the burial site there in the cornfield in Indiana. So do you think the mob wanted the bodies to be found?
No.
They not at all. They didn't to send a message like Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
They wanted him to disappear and people to be asking today where they were, because they were cut to pieces. I mean, it gets gruesome. They were cut to pieces and put in that grave.
Well, the fact that the bodies are found, that's physical evidence that becomes entered into the trial of Operation Family Secrets, that they were in fact murdered, and it helped put away the top 14 guys in the mob that were still there.
Well, and that was DNA. Okay, in '86 we didn't have DNA to be able to figure out who did what, but through the OJ trial, let's go there, in the early 1990s, DNA becomes an issue, and they use the DNA at the Family Secrets trial. You've done stories on that too, right? They use the DNA to be able to then point at the perps.
Yeah. I don't want to give too much of a plug to Frank Calabrese Jr., but his book does run this down. It's a pretty good job, an account of what led up to the trial and the trial itself. And I should let our listeners here in Las Vegas know that he is a regular down at the Mob Museum. He makes presentations 3, 4, 5 times a week. Apparently, there are no mobsters left worth killing him, because if the Chicago outfit still had strength, I would think that Calabrese Jr. would not want to be having presentations where people could find him. But I am told, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm told it's a really great presentation, and our interview with him was certainly compelling.
And it's the Mob Museum here in Las Vegas. We've done shows from there. We did 3 shows from there with Jeff Schumacher. And it's a fascinating place to go to learn a lot of these things, not just Vegas related. It's all over the country, if you will, worldwide, with some of the mob stuff. But and Frank also talked about, at one point, we're going to get to this in the next segment, so I'm going to tease through to the next segment, where a popular Las Vegas mayor and attorney you saw him in some of the video earlier in the show, attorney for Tony Spilotro, was also collateral damage. He wasn't on the hit list, but collateral damage. We're going to have that when we return here to Mystery Wire and talk about that angle. Was sort of interesting to find out from your interview. Okay, until I saw your interview with Frank Calabrese Jr., I didn't realize there was a hit squad sent here to Las Vegas to take out Tony the Ant Spilotro before they took him out in Chicago, yes? Was that news to you? Had you heard that before?
I had never heard it before, and I was shocked by it. According to Calabrese Jr., they were here for months looking for an opportunity to bump off Tony Spilotro before he had to come back to Chicago, and they never got a chance, for reasons we're about to hear.
Well, and they keep it pretty secret, certainly. They weren't out broadcasting that to a whole lot of people.
Right.
But the mob was not happy when they couldn't take him out here in Las Vegas. So here's some new information from Frank Calabrese Jr.
Be here, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, and then it's a need to know as you go. So my uncle was told he had to take a train out here, because back then you could take trains, no IDs, nothing like that. Planes were still good, but still. There was explosives they had an Uzi with a silencer, and my uncle was to bring the explosives out. Then when they got here, it was picked up at the train. There was a crew of guys, there was about 8-10 guys, and they were tasked with following Tony and trying to kill Tony. So they had an apartment out here where they kept everything at. They bought some work cars out here, work cars and fictitious names and all that. They're trying to follow Tony and Tony's brother Michael, but they can't get close to him because the FBI and the local law enforcement are following him 24/7. And if any of them, Spilotros or law enforcement, see this hit team out here, there's going to be problems. They're out here for months. It was February of 1986 that they first came out. They're out here, they're surveilling them, they're watching, they're trying to see. Then they find out we can get them at Oscar Goodman's law office because Oscar was his thing. So then they were watching, and they're like, we can get him when he's coming out the doors. I guess there was a parking complex right there or something. And so they had to get permission from back home. And the permission was, yeah, if Oscar's got to go, it's collateral damage. They didn't do it because they couldn't get it.
Oscar Goodman later became two-term mayor of Las Vegas. His wife, Carolyn, two-term mayor of Las Vegas, and to think, is that something the mob would have done? Yeah, they wouldn't have thought twice. They tried to do it, apparently. Wow.
Yeah, I'd never heard this story before, that they had a hit team, including Frank Calabrese's uncle, Nick, who was a killer for the Chicago outfit. He came out here to lead the effort, and they were trying to get a chance to either blow up or shoot Tony Spilotro here in Las Vegas. I never heard the part about Oscar and being a potential collateral damage and them blowing up the office or taking him out. He was a valuable guy to the mob. He represented a lot more mobsters than just Tony Spilotro. He represented Lefty Rosenthal. I think he represented Meyer Lansky at one point. But I guess sounds like they were willing to take that chance if they had to. It's funny because at the same time, Oscar Goodman, the FBI considered Oscar to be like a consigliere to the mob, like he was in on it because mobsters would use his office for meetings back in those days. I don't know if the former mayor is aware of what Mr. Calabrese has said, but I'm going to share that information with him, and he's never been shy about giving comments in response.
Oh, no, he does like to, with some Bombay Sapphire gin, that'll get him talking.
Yeah. I've had some Bombay Sapphire gin with the mayor.
With the mayor.
More than once, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's certainly a fascinating story here for Las Vegas when you put all the mob stuff together, and we're going to have the full interview. I'm going to give his recommendation as high as I can give it. We left a lot of the stuff out from Frank Calabrese. We picked some pretty good stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that you've got to hear this guy. You can see him at the Mob Museum, but you can see his interview. We're going to post it up on 8 News Now on the Mystery Wire page so you can see the entire thing.
Yeah, fascinating guy, fascinating book. I need to get down there to see his presentation, but what we heard from him in our interview was really good. New stuff that I hadn't heard from before in all the years of following this mob topic.
And we occasionally solve some mysteries here. Maybe we solved a bit of a mystery here in Las Vegas that has been an integral part of this city for decades, certainly. So, George, thank you very much. Yeah. And appreciate it. And thanks for watching, everybody. We appreciate you watching Mystery Wire. You can go to YouTube and watch it there. But best thing to do is download the app onto your TV set so that you can watch all the episodes that we've done in the past. They are all there. So go to your smart TV, look for 8 News Now, and be able to download the Mystery Wire app to be able to check it all out. And we appreciate you watching, everybody. Thanks. Bye for now.